Hello again, everyone. You're listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research. My guest today is Jessica Jones of Alliance Technical Group. She hosted a general lunch discussion at the North American HR Executive Summit on the topic of maintaining and transferring culture during mergers and acquisitions, which, to be honest, I kind of am blown away that that is a topic that got discussed for an hour around a group of people who picked it, and I think it's going to be really interesting hearing some of the takeaways from it. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't we start off with why did you pick this topic? Because you have some editorial control. You could have been talking about budgeting or succession planning, but maintaining a culture in mergers and acquisitions, that's coming from a real place.
Yes, well, we do a lot of mergers and acquisitions, mostly acquisitions, and I felt like a lot of companies either have it really right or really wrong and wanted to get other people's intake on how they're doing.
Why don't we start off just giving people some context? What does your organization do?
We are an environmental testing company, so we do a lot of, we started as a stack testing company, and now we also do leak, what we call LDAR, which is leak detection, and also software. We actually purchased software companies this last year, and consulting, environmental consulting.
So I can see how acquisition is a big part of what you do as you need new capabilities and new technologies come onto the scene.
Correct.
All right. So having chosen mergers and acquisitions and culture transfer in them as your topic, who did you think was going to join you for that conversation? We don't have to name specific companies, but like big companies, little companies, different industries.
I was expecting a lot of little industries because most of the time the larger ones know exactly. I mean, it's like corporate takeover. They know exactly what they're doing when they come in through the door.
And was that your experience? Who came to the lunch?
We actually had a mix of both. We had two large insurance companies that were worldwide, and we had several little ones, and then we also had like Penske Trucking, who is massive. So they were all wanting to know what everybody else was doing to see if there was some best practices that we could take away.
At the very beginning, you said companies either get it really right or really wrong, and I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of that, but maybe we can start off with what does getting it right look like to you?
Getting it right looks like the people being happy in a communication plan that's laid out and a full integration of people meshing the cultures together, not absolutely taking over and making it your own, but seeing where the differences are and making sure that we're living up to the standards that they may have.
So getting it wrong would be the reverse of that, where it's very top down, do as we say, our way or the highway, that sort of thing is not the right way to go.
Correct.
So as you're going around this table and people are telling their stories, was there anything in particular that surprised you?
It surprised me a lot of people didn't actually have a plan of action for due diligence or for the integration itself, and some of them weren't even involved in the process of before it actually went to market. They're just told this is what we're doing, and they never get to see on site until the actual document's signed and the ink is dry.
Wow. So when you hear that and other people around the table are hearing that, what are sort of the responses? Like, I can imagine there is an element of spontaneity to a cultural transition and merging, but I mean, to have no plan, what was their input?
The input was we kind of just go with the flow of what's told to us instead of actually creating their own playbook to say this is what HR is going to do and this is our standard on how we're going to do things in the future and these are our lessons learned from what we did things in the past, and trying to incorporate those.
And again, we don't want top-down do as we say. When you're acquiring somebody, they have a culture that was attractive enough to you to want to acquire them. So there has to be a back and forth, I would think.
You would think, but it seemed like a lot of the people at the table, the HR team was not even involved in that back and forth.
Wow.
So that's what kind of, really resonated with me is sometimes, we may still not have a seat at the table for some companies, and they're just told, hey, this is what we're doing, it's next Friday, and you need to be there.
Wow.
Instead of actually having a seat at the table to say, this culture is going to fit with us, or this culture is going to be too much to bring into ours. Or this, it's nothing that we want to touch in the first place. Because, some companies don't follow the laws and don't realize, especially mom and pop type shops, they may make everybody's salary, or they may not. One girl said she acquired a company, they didn't do their I-9s till 2 weeks after their first payroll. And I'm sitting there going, okay, that's not legal. But,
Right.
And having to fix those things and acquire that risk is something that needs to be on the table for the CEOs to look at before that ink is dry.
I mean, you just gave two very prominent examples of just how big an issue this can be. I have to think there are HR professionals who saw the title of this episode and said, "Oh, we do some mergers and acquisitions," and they've clicked in. So, what were some of the good takeaways? What were some best practices that maybe you hadn't heard before, or put in an interesting way?
Some of them said which I don't think this is a best practice, but some of them said they don't bring any of the acquired company's leadership into their leadership, which was kind of weird for me. But their explanation on it was, we want to make sure that our people have a chance to grow, and we've groomed people for these roles, and we're going to give them a soft landing, but they're going to go out the door when we acquire the company and go do something else.
Well, and I think people in leadership position probably understood that when the acquisition was discussed. So it's not they've shown up on their first day of this merger and there's no seat at the table for them.
Yeah, and that concerned me because my comment to that was, we have acquired some brilliant minds out of acquisitions. Actually, our chief administrative officer is from an acquisition that we had last year, and he is phenomenal. So I think that they may be missing out on some of that brain power by doing that.
I also have to think in a business like yours, where it's new capabilities that you're after, well, how often are those capabilities going to be embedded in the leader who made that a company attractive enough to acquire in the first place?
Correct.
I think one of the great opportunities in a podcast format like this, your lunch topic went up on a website and an app, and it was first come, first serve. The first 10 people are like, I'm interested in mergers and acquisitions. They sign up for it, and nobody else got to be part of that conversation. If you could maybe summarize best practices or key takeaways, or the things that people from the lunch are maybe going to take away from that experience, could you summarize it for us?
I think that the main summary was to come up with a plan. Have a plan of action. Make a playbook. Keep track of the best practices that you are incorporating, and making sure those are done consistently. I think HR is one of those areas where consistency is very important. And it's the same thing with mergers and acquisitions, is we have to make sure that we're consistent in coming up with that playbook and best practices. It would be their best action for smooth integration.
Going in with some intentionality and a plan, and asking some questions, and just an awareness of what is happening. What a fantastic way to summarize a great conversation. Jessica, thank you so much for being here today.
I appreciate you having me on.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.